A perfect wedding is supposed to mark the beginning of a new life. But for Amelia Carter, it became the moment everything was taken from her. The morning began with precision. Every detail had been carefully planned, controlled, and executed with the kind of perfection expected from families who did not tolerate mistakes. The venue stood as a symbol of status, an expansive estate tucked away from public visibility, surrounded by guarded gates and silent surveillance. Nothing about it suggested vulnerability. Everything about it reflected power. Amelia Carter moved through it all with quiet composure. She had been prepared for this moment her entire life. Raised within an environment where appearances mattered more than emotions, she had learned early how to maintain control, how to speak carefully, how to move with intention, how to conceal what she truly felt beneath a calm exterior. To those around her, she appeared exactly as expected, elegant, poised, and entirely in place. But beneath that perfection, there had always been something else, something restrained, something observant. Her upbringing had not been ordinary. While others saw privilege, Amelia had experienced structure, strict, calculated, and often distant. Her family, though influential, operated in ways that were never fully explained. Conversations ended when she entered rooms. Decisions were made without her involvement, and yet she had always been positioned as someone important to those decisions. This marriage was one of them. The alliance between her family and her fiancés had been arranged with careful intention. It was not simply a union. It was a consolidation of influence, power, and protection. The Carter name carried weight, but her fiancé's family carried something more dangerous, connections that extended into spaces most people never saw. Amelia had sensed it long before the wedding day, but she had never questioned it openly, because questioning was not encouraged. So she adapted. As she stood at the center of the ceremony, surrounded by figures who represented authority in different forms, political, financial, and unseen, everything appeared flawless. The guests were composed, their expressions measured, their interactions controlled. No one spoke loudly. No one acted unpredictably. It was a kind of environment where power was understood, not displayed. Yet something beneath it all felt unstable. Not visibly, not obviously, but subtly, a tension that could not be explained, only felt. Amelia noticed it in the way certain individuals avoided eye contact, in the way security positioned themselves not just around the venue, but within it, in the way her fiancé's family maintained a level of alertness that did not match the occasion. She processed these details silently, observing, not reacting, because reacting without understanding was dangerous. The ceremony continued. Words were spoken. Movements were made. Everything followed the expected sequence, until it didn't. The shift was immediate and irreversible. It did not begin with noise. It began with silence, a silence that felt different from the controlled quiet that had defined the event. This silence carried weight. It spread quickly, subtly, moving through the space like something unseen but undeniable. Amelia felt it before she saw it, and when she turned, everything changed. The perimeter had been breached, not with chaos, but with precision. Armed men moved through the venue with calculated efficiency. Their presence was not frantic. It was controlled, intentional. They were not reacting. They were executing. The guests froze, not because they didn't understand what was happening, but because they did. No one screamed. No one resisted, because resistance in that moment was not an option. Amelia's mind processed the situation rapidly. This was not random. This was not a mistake. This was targeted. The realization settled in instantly, not as panic, but as clarity. She was not witnessing an attack. She was the reason for it. Hands reached for her, firm, unhesitating. She did not fight, not because she couldn't, but because she understood something critical. Fighting without understanding would only accelerate the outcome. So she observed, even as she was pulled away from the ceremony, even as the world around her shifted from controlled elegance to silent submission. She noticed everything. The way the armed men avoided unnecessary movement, the way they communicated without words, the way the guests lowered their gaze instead of reacting. This was not just fear. This was recognition. Whoever had orchestrated this was known, feared, respected in a way that prevented resistance. Amelia's heartbeat remained steady, but her thoughts sharpened, because now she understood something deeper. This was not about her marriage. It was about something else entirely. Something hidden beneath the surface of everything she had known. As she was led away from the ceremony, she caught one final glimpse of the space she had stood in moments before. Unchanged, controlled, as if nothing had happened. And that was the most disturbing detail of all, because it meant this world operated on rules she had not been fully aware of. Rules where power dictated reality, and reality adjusted accordingly. She was escorted outside. The air felt different, colder, heavier. A vehicle waited, dark, unmarked, positioned with intention. This was not a hurried escape. This was a planned extraction. Amelia was guided toward it, every movement precise, every second accounted for. And still, no one interfered. No one attempted to stop it, because no one could, or no one was willing to. As she reached the vehicle, something shifted again, not in the environment, but in presence. The men around her adjusted subtly. Their posture changed. Their attention redirected, not toward her, but toward someone else. Someone approaching. Amelia felt it before she saw him, that same controlled silence, but deeper, heavier, more absolute. And when she turned, she understood why. Lucien Devereux did not need to announce himself. His presence did it for him. He moved without urgency, without hesitation. Every step measured, every movement deliberate. The kind of control that did not need to be proven, because it already existed. The environment responded to him, not with fear alone, but with recognition, authority, finality. Amelia studied him carefully, because in that moment, understanding him meant understanding everything. He did not look at the others. He did not acknowledge the chaos that had preceded his arrival. His attention was singular, focused, on her. And that focus was not impulsive. It was analytical, as if he were not seeing her for the first time, but confirming something. Amelia felt it immediately. This was not chance. This was not curiosity. This was intention. Lucien Devereux had not taken her randomly. He had chosen her. The realization settled with clarity, not fear, not confusion, but understanding. She was not just a bride taken from a ceremony. She was part of something far more calculated, something planned long before this moment. Lucien's gaze remained steady, unmoving, and within it there was something unexpected, not emotion, but interest, measured, controlled, dangerous in its precision. Amelia did not look away, because she understood something critical in that moment. Looking away would mean submission, and she was not ready to give that, not without understanding the rules of the game she had just been forced into. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, but heavy with implication. And then, without a word, Lucien turned, a signal, the kind that did not need to be spoken. Amelia was guided into the vehicle. The door closed behind her, sealing her into a reality she had not chosen, but one she now had to understand. As the vehicle began to move, the last thing she saw was Lucien standing outside, unmoving, unshaken, watching, not the chaos, not the aftermath, but her, as if everything that had just happened had only one purpose. And she was it. The distance between them increased, but the weight of his presence did not fade, because Amelia realized something in that moment, something that settled deeper than fear. She had not been taken because she was weak. She had been taken because she mattered, and in a world like his, that was far more dangerous. As the vehicle disappears into the distance, Amelia realizes one terrifying truth. Lucien Devereux didn't interrupt her wedding by chance. He planned it, and whatever he wanted from her has already begun. The vehicle did not slow. It did not hesitate. It moved through the city with the kind of certainty that suggested the road had already been cleared long before it arrived. Amelia sat in silence, her posture composed, her expression controlled, but her mind was anything but still. What had just happened was not chaos. It was execution, and the man behind it was not someone who acted without purpose. Lucien Devereux, The name alone carried weight she had never fully understood until now. Amelia had heard it before, not directly, never spoken openly, but whispered, referenced in fragments, always followed by silence. The kind of silence that suggested the conversation had gone too far. And now, she was inside his world. The realization settled slowly, not as panic, but as awareness, because panic would cloud judgment. And right now, judgment was the only thing she could rely on. The vehicle eventually slowed, not abruptly, but with precision. The gates ahead opened before they even reached them, as if the system recognized the presence of its owner without needing confirmation. Layers of security unfolded seamlessly, each one reinforcing the same message. This was not just a residence. It was a controlled environment, a fortress designed not only to protect, but to dominate. As the vehicle came to a stop, Amelia did not move immediately. She observed. Timing mattered. Reactions mattered. Everything mattered. The door opened, and she stepped out. The estate stood before her, vast and imposing, designed with elegance that masked its true nature. It was not meant to impress. It was meant to establish control. Every detail, from the architecture to positioning of personnel, reflected a system built on order. Nothing here was accidental. Amelia walked forward, guided but not forced. And that distinction was important because control did not always require force. Sometimes it required structure. She was led inside. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Cool, silent, measured. The kind of silence that did not feel empty, but watched. People moved through the space with quiet efficiency. No one spoke unnecessarily. No one lingered. Every action had purpose. And every movement acknowledged one thing: authority. Lucien Devereux's authority. Amelia felt it without seeing him. The presence of someone who did not need to be visible to be felt. She was guided into a large room, minimalist in design, but overwhelming in presence. There were no distractions, no unnecessary details, just space and control. She remained standing, waiting, because she understood something now. This was not about immediate action. This was about observation, and she was being observed. Seconds passed, then minutes. Time stretched in a way that tested patience. But Amelia did not react, because reacting would reveal something, and she was not ready to reveal anything. Then he entered. Lucien Devereux did not make an entrance. He simply appeared. And yet, the entire atmosphere shifted, not dramatically, not visibly, but undeniably. The space adjusted to him, as if it had been waiting. He moved with the same controlled precision she had seen before. No wasted motion, no unnecessary expression. His presence was not loud, but it was absolute. This was a man who did not need to prove power, because he existed within it. Amelia turned her attention to him fully, studying, analyzing, because she understood something critical. If she was going to survive this, she needed to understand him. Lucien's gaze met hers, direct, unwavering. There was no hesitation in it, no uncertainty. But there was something else, something subtle, something calculated. Interest, not emotional, not impulsive, but deliberate, as if he were confirming a theory. Amelia held his gaze, not as a challenge, but as a refusal to retreat, because retreat, in a world like this, was a first step toward losing control, and she could not afford that. Not yet, not without understanding the rules. The silence between them extended, heavy, measured, neither of them breaking it, because neither of them needed to. This was not a conversation. This was an evaluation. Lucien observed her posture, her breathing, her stillness. He was not looking at her as a person. He was analyzing her as a variable. And Amelia understood that, which is why she gave him nothing. No visible fear, no unnecessary movement, no reaction that could be easily defined, because the moment she became predictable, she would become controllable, and that was not something she was willing to allow. Lucien's attention did not waver. If anything, it sharpened, because what he saw did not match expectation. Most people placed in her position would react. Fear, panic, submission. But Amelia did none of those things. and that was information, important information. Lucian did not speak, but his silence carried intent. He moved slightly closer, not invading her space, but testing it, measuring her response. Amelia remained still, not rigid, not defensive, but aware, always aware. And that awareness was dangerous because it suggested something beyond surface-level behavior. Lucian recognized it. Immediately, this was not just a woman taken from a wedding. This was someone trained, or shaped, to observe before reacting, to process before responding, to control what others would reveal instinctively. And that changed the situation, because now she was no longer just a captive. She was a variable, an unknown, and unknowns required attention. Lucian's expression did not change, but something in his gaze shifted, not dramatically, but enough to indicate that his interest had moved beyond initial curiosity. Amelia saw it, not clearly, but enough to understand that something had changed. The balance had not shifted, not yet, but it had become unstable. Lucian turned slightly, his attention momentarily shifting toward the environment around them, a subtle signal, one that did not need to be spoken. And immediately, the space responded. People moved, positions adjusted, the system around him activated, not in chaos, but in alignment, because this was how his world functioned. Everything responded to him, without question, without delay, without resistance. And Amelia was now inside that system. She understood it clearly. He controlled everything, the space, the people, the outcomes, and now, her, or at least, that was the assumption. Lucian returned his attention to her, and in that moment, a decision was made, not spoken, not announced, but finalized, because that was how power like his operated, quietly, efficiently, without explanation. Amelia felt it before anything changed externally, the shift, the conclusion, the outcome. And when Lucian finally moved again, it was not to leave, it was not to dismiss her, it was to define her position, not as a threat, not as a liability, but as something else, something far more controlled, and far more intentional. The room adjusted once more, but this time it was different because this was not preparation. This was execution of a decision already made. Amelia remained still, but her mind sharpened further, because now the real situation was beginning. Lucian Devereux did not act without reason, and whatever reason had led him to take her had not yet been revealed, but it would be, and when it was, everything would change. For now, she watched, he analyzed, and the system around them adjusted accordingly, because this was not about dominance alone. This was about control, and control was never rushed. It was built, step by step, decision by decision, and Amelia Carter had just become part of it, not by choice, but by design. Cliffhanger. Lucian finally turns away, issuing a silent command that changes everything. She will not be eliminated. She will remain under his control. Control, in Lucian Devereux's world, was never accidental. Every movement, every decision, every outcome, constructed with precision. Nothing entered his system without purpose, and nothing remained without value. That was the foundation of his empire. That was what made him feared, which is why Amelia Carter's presence inside it made no sense. And yet, she remained, not as a prisoner thrown into confinement, not as a liability waiting to be removed, but as something undefined, something observed. The estate had its own rhythm. Amelia began to recognize it within hours of being inside. There was no chaos here, no unpredictability. Every corridor, every guarded entrance, every silent figure moving through the space operated within a structure that had been perfected over time. It was not simply a place where power existed. It was where power was maintained through discipline. Isolation was part of that discipline. Amelia noticed it immediately. The sections of the state she was allowed to access were limited, but not in a way that felt like confinement. It was more calculated than that. She was not locked away. She was placed within boundaries that were invisible but undeniable, a controlled environment, a space where she could move, but never freely, where she could observe, but only what she was meant to see. And yet, no one treated her like a threat. No one treated her like a victim either. They treated her like something uncertain, something they did not fully understand. And that uncertainty did not come from her behavior. It came from Lucian, because his decisions defined everything inside this place, and his decision to keep her was not understood. Amelia saw it in the subtle exchanges between staff members, the glances that lingered slightly longer than necessary, the pauses in movement when she entered a space. No one questioned openly, but the question existed. Why her? Amelia asked herself the same thing, but unlike them, she did not expect an immediate answer, because answers, in a world like this, were not given. They were uncovered, and that required patience, observation, control. So she adapted. She watched the way the guards rotated positions at precise intervals, the way information flowed quietly between individuals without being spoken aloud, the way decisions seemed to occur before instructions were given. Everything here functioned as part of a system built around one person, Lucian Devereux, and at the center of that system was control. Amelia began to understand that control did not always look like force. Sometimes it looked like stillness, like silence, like allowing something to exist just long enough to understand it. And that was what Lucian was doing with her. He was not restricting her. He was studying her. The realization settled slowly, but once it did, it changed everything, because being controlled was predictable, but being studied was dangerous. It meant she was not just part of his environment. She was part of his focus. Amelia adjusted accordingly. Her movements became more deliberate, her reactions more measured. She revealed nothing unnecessary, because every detail could become information, and information was power. Days passed, or what felt like days. Time moved differently here, without external markers. It became something abstract, controlled, just like everything else. Lucian's presence was consistent, but not overwhelming. He did not appear constantly. He did not impose himself unnecessarily, but he was always aware. Amelia could feel it, in the way conversations shifted when she entered a space, in the way silence followed certain movements, in the way nothing ever truly escaped observation. And then there were the moments when he chose to appear, not frequently, but deliberately. Those moments carried weight, because they were not random. They were timed, measured, each one serving a purpose. The first time he entered the space where she had been placed, Amelia did not move immediately. She had learned that reacting too quickly revealed intention, so she waited just enough, then turned. Lucian stood at a distance, not close enough to invade, not far enough to disengage, positioned perfectly. As always, his gaze settled on her, and once again, there was no hesitation in it, no uncertainty, but there was analysis, constant, unrelenting. He was not looking for weakness. He was looking for patterns. Amelia understood that now, which is why she gave him none. No predictable reactions, no emotional displays, no behavior that could be easily categorized, because the moment she became something definable, she would become something controllable. And that was not an option. The silence between them stretched again, but it was different now, less unfamiliar, more intentional, because both of them understood what it represented. This was not tension. This was strategy. Lucian moved slightly, not closer, but enough to shift the dynamic. A test. Amelia recognized it instantly and remained exactly as she was, still, composed, aware. Lucian's gaze sharpened, because once again, she did not respond the way she should have. And that was information, important information, the kind that changed variables, the kind that altered outcomes. Amelia could feel the shift, subtle, but undeniable. Something about her did not align with expectation, and Lucian was beginning to recognize it. He studied her longer this time, not just her posture, but her stillness, her control, the absence of instinctive fear. It was not that she wasn't afraid. It was that she did not allow fear to define her actions, and that was rare. Lucian turned away eventually, not dismissing her, but concluding something. A calculation completed, a decision reinforced. Amelia watched him leave, but her thoughts did not follow him. They turned inward, because now the question had changed. It was no longer just why he took her. It was, what did he already know? The thought settled heavily, because it explained too much. His lack of urgency, his controlled observation, the absence of unnecessary force. These were not the actions of someone discovering information. These were the actions of someone confirming it. Amelia's past, her identity, the life she had believed to be structured and controlled, suddenly felt incomplete, like something had been hidden from her, not by strangers, but by those closest to her. The realization was not immediate, but once it formed, it did not leave, because everything pointed to one conclusion. She was not here by coincidence. She was here because she was meant to be, and Lucian Devereux had known that before she did. The environment remained unchanged. The system continued. Everything moved as it always had. But for Amelia, nothing was the same, because now she understood that she was not just being observed. She was being evaluated based on something she did not yet fully understand. And that was the most dangerous position of all. Time passed again, measured, controlled, until the pattern broke. Not dramatically, but enough. A shift in movement, a change in rhythm, something subtle but significant. Amelia noticed it immediately, because by now she had learned how to read the system. People moved differently, faster, more focused. Information passed more urgently, and at the center of it was Lucian. He did not appear immediately, but his presence was felt, stronger, more concentrated, as if something had changed, as if something had been introduced into the system that required immediate attention. Amelia remained where she was, but her awareness sharpened, because this was not routine. This was reaction, and Lucian Devereux did not react without reason. Minutes later, he appeared, but this time there was a difference, subtle but undeniable. In his hand, a file, unmarked, but important enough to alter the entire atmosphere around him. He did not look at her immediately. His attention remained on the contents. But the moment he stopped, the shift happened. His expression did not change dramatically. He did not show emotion, but something in his stillness tightened, focused, darkened, as if what he had just read had confirmed something significant, something dangerous, something that connected directly to her. And when he finally lifted his gaze, locking onto Amelia once more, there was no longer just analysis. There was recognition, calculated, certain, unavoidable. Amelia felt it instantly, the moment everything shifted, because whatever had been inside that file had answered the question Lucian had been asking from the beginning. And now, he was no longer observing to understand. He was observing because he already did. As Lucian closes the file with controlled precision, Amelia realizes a terrifying truth. He didn't just take her to learn who she is, he took her because he already knows. Some truths are not discovered, they are inherited. The shift began the moment Lucian closed the file. It was subtle, almost invisible, but in a world built on control, even the smallest shift carried meaning. Amelia saw it in the way the room seemed to tighten around him. Not physically, but structurally, as if everything within his environment adjusted to accommodate a new variable, her, but not the version of her he had been studying, the version he had just confirmed. Lucian did not speak. He did not need to, because silence in his world was never empty. It was filled with conclusions, and whatever conclusion he had reached had changed everything. Amelia remained still, her posture unchanged, her expression controlled. But internally, something had shifted. Not fear, not confusion. Awareness. Because now she understood something critical. He knew something about her. Something she did not fully know herself. Lucian moved away without explanation. Not abruptly, not dismissively, but with intention. The kind of movement that signaled continuation, not conclusion. because this was not the end of his investigation. It was a beginning of something deeper. Amelia watched him leave, her thoughts sharpening with every second. Her past, her family, the life she had believed was controlled and structured, suddenly felt incomplete. Not false, but edited, as if pieces had been removed before she ever had the chance to see them. And now, those missing pieces were beginning to surface, not through her, but through him. Hours passed in silence. But this silence was different. It carried weight, tension, movement beneath stillness. Because somewhere within the estate, information was being processed, connections were being formed, and Lucien Devereux was rebuilding a narrative that had once nearly destroyed him. He stood in a separate part of the estate, a space rarely accessed, not because it was hidden, but because it was reserved for information that required absolute control. The file rested open in front of him, but it was no longer just a file. It was a link, a bridge between past and present, between something buried and something standing directly inside his world. Amelia Carter. The name itself meant nothing on the surface, but names were rarely the truth. They were identifiers, masks. What mattered was what existed beneath them, and what existed beneath hers was not simple. Lucien's gaze moved across the documents again. Details, records, fragments of history that had been carefully obscured, not erased, but hidden in ways that required precision to uncover. And now that they were uncovered, the pattern was clear. Her family was not ordinary. They had never been. They had existed within the same shadows Lucien controlled, not as allies, not as direct enemies, but as something far more dangerous, independent, strategic, invisible when necessary, powerful when required. And years ago, they had been connected to an event Lucien had not forgotten, could not forget, because it had nearly ended everything. The memory did not come as emotion. It came as calculation, a reconstruction of a moment where control had almost been lost, where trust had been used as a weapon, where someone close had made a decision that shifted the balance of power. That decision had nearly destroyed his empire, and the name connected to that betrayal appeared again, not directly, not obviously, but within the structure of Amelia's past. A link, faint, but undeniable. Lucien's expression remained controlled, but his focus sharpened, because this was no longer coincidence. This was design. Amelia Carter was not a random variable introduced into a system. She was part of something that had been set in motion long before she understood it. And that meant one thing. She was not just connected to the past. She was part of its continuation. Back in her assigned space, Amelia felt the shift without seeing it. The environment had changed again, not visibly, but in rhythm. People moved with more precision. Communication became more contained, and the silence became heavier, because something had been confirmed, and that confirmation had consequences. Amelia began to piece it together, not fully, not clearly, but enough to understand the direction. Her father, the structure of her upbringing, the controlled environment she had always existed within. It had never been about protection. It had been about containment. Information had been kept from her. Decisions had been made around her. And now, she was inside a world where those decisions were being exposed. The realization was not immediate, but once it formed, it did not leave. She was not just someone who had been taken. She was someone who had been placed. And the difference between those two things was everything. Lucien returned hours later. But this time, he did not observe from a distance. He entered with purpose. Direct, focused, his gaze found her immediately. And this time, there was no uncertainty in it, only clarity. Amelia met his gaze again. But something had changed, not in her posture, not in her expression, but in her awareness. Because now, she knew not the details, not the full truth, but the direction of it. And that changed how she saw him, not just as a captor, but as someone who held answers that had been kept from her entire life. The silence between them was different now, less about evaluation, more about recognition. Lucien moved slightly closer, and this time, it was not a test. It was confirmation. He was no longer studying her to understand. He was studying her because he already did, and what he understood was dangerous for both of them, because if her presence was tied to that past, then she was not just a variable. She was a trigger for something unfinished, something unresolved, something that had been waiting to surface again. Lucian turned slightly, his thoughts already moving ahead, calculating, adjusting, preparing, because if Amelia Carter was connected to that betrayal, then she was not just part of the past. She was central to what came next, and that meant she could not be removed. She could not be ignored. She had to be controlled, not through force, but through understanding, because control without understanding was temporary. And Lucian Devereux did not operate in temporary outcomes. He operated in permanence. Amelia watched him closely, because she understood something now. He was not just dangerous because of his power. He was dangerous because of his precision. And now, that precision was focused on her, not as a threat, but as something far more complicated, something tied to a history she had never been allowed to see. Her identity was no longer stable. It was shifting, reforming, becoming something else. And whatever it was becoming, it was connected to him. The room remained silent, but the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the weight of truth waiting to surface, and both of them knew it. Lucian turned away again, but not to leave, to act, because information like this did not sit idle. It triggered movement, and that movement was already beginning. Elsewhere, beyond the estate, beyond his control, a separate force had begun searching, not blindly, not randomly, but with direction, with intent, with knowledge that should not have existed. Lucian received the confirmation moments later, quietly, efficiently, but the impact was immediate. His gaze darkened slightly, not with emotion, but with calculation shifting under pressure, because whoever was searching for Amelia was not insignificant. They were powerful, organized, and most importantly, they were aware of her, aware of the connection, aware of something that had been hidden for years. And that changed everything, because now this was no longer just about the past. It was about what was coming next. And what was coming was not small. It was not contained. It was something that could challenge even him. Lucian stood still for a moment, not frozen, but recalculating, because for the first time, the situation was no longer fully within his control, and that was unacceptable. Amelia felt the shift again, stronger this time, because whatever had just been discovered had raised the stakes, not just for him, but for her, because now she was not just a piece of a hidden past. She was a target for forces she did not yet understand, and those forces were already moving. Cliffhanger. Lucian realizes the truth with absolute clarity. He is not the only one who knows what Amelia is, and whoever else is searching for her may be powerful enough to destroy everything he has built. Control was no longer invisible. It had become defined. After the discovery of her connection, after the confirmation that Amelia Carter was not an accident but a consequence, the entire structure around her shifted. What had once felt like observation now felt like containment. Not chaotic, not aggressive, but absolute, because Lucian Devereux did not react with panic. He responded with precision, and his response to her existence was protection. But protection, in his world, did not resemble safety. It resembled ownership of outcome. The estate transformed in ways that were subtle yet undeniable. Security increased. Movement became more restricted. Access points were reduced, not visibly, but strategically. Paths that once existed no longer did. Rooms that felt open now felt measured. Every space Amelia occupied had boundaries. One she could not see, but could feel. The system had adapted to her importance. And that adaptation carried a message. She was no longer just being studied. She was being secured. Lucian did not explain immediately. He did not offer reassurance, because reassurance implied emotional investment, and emotion was not how he operated. Instead, he made the decision, and the system followed. Amelia noticed a change within hours. not through direct instruction, but through absence, less freedom in movement, more presence in silence. The subtle awareness that she was no longer allowed to exist without being accounted for. It was not force. It was control refined to its purest form, and it unsettled her more than fear ever could, because fear was direct. This was calculated. When Lucian finally chose to address it, it was not through conversation. It was through presence. He entered the space without warning, as he always did. But this time, there was no evaluation in his gaze, only certainty. Amelia turned toward him, her posture composed, her expression unchanged. But internally, she was waiting, because something had shifted, and she needed to understand it. Lucian stopped at a controlled distance, close enough to define the interaction, far enough to maintain dominance. His gaze held hers, unwavering, and within it, there was something new, not curiosity, not suspicion, but acknowledgement. He knew who she was, or at least, he knew enough, and that knowledge had changed his approach. Amelia felt it immediately, the difference in the way he looked at her, not as something to understand, but as something to manage, because now she mattered, and in his world, what mattered was controlled. The silence between them stretched. But this time, it was not neutral. It carried weight, because both of them understood what had changed. Amelia's mind moved quickly, analyzing, reconstructing, trying to connect the fragments she had begun to uncover. Her past, her father, the hidden structures that had existed around her life without explanation. And now, this, Lucian's decision, his control, his refusal to release her. It was no longer just about power. It was about necessity. And that realization was dangerous, because it meant she was not just a captive. She was valuable, and value, in a world like this, invited danger. Lucian moved slightly, his presence shifting just enough to signal the end of silence, not through words, but through intent. The message was clear without being spoken. She was not leaving. Not now. Not while the situation remained unresolved. Not while others were searching. Because they were. Amelia knew that now. Even without confirmation. She could feel it in the way the system had reacted. In the way everything had tightened around her. In the way Lucian had shifted from observation to control. She was being hunted. The thought settled slowly. Not as panic, but as understanding. Because it explained everything. Her past. Her hidden identity, the attention she had never questioned before, it had all been leading to this. And now, she was at the center of it. Lucian turned slightly, his attention already moving beyond immediate interaction, because for him, this was not emotional. It was strategic. Every decision he made now would be calculated against one outcome, maintaining control. And Amelia was part of that equation. But for her, the experience was different, because while he saw structure, she felt confinement. The estate, once expansive, now felt limited, not physically, but psychologically. Every step she took was measured, every movement observed, every moment accounted for, and the realization settled deeper with each passing hour. She was safe, but she was not free, and that distinction became a prison. Amelia began to adapt, not out of submission, but out of necessity. She watched more closely, listened more carefully, not just to what was visible, but to what was implied. Because Lucian's world did not operate on surface-level information. It operated on patterns, and she was beginning to see them. The way decisions were made before they were spoken, the way people adjusted without needing instruction, the way control extended beyond physical presence. Lucian did not need to be everywhere, because his system was. And now, that system was focused on her. Amelia began to understand him differently, not as a man, but as a structure, a force built on logic, not emotion. Every action he took had purpose. Every movement was part of a larger design. And within that design, she had a role, but she did not know what it was. And that uncertainty was suffocating, because not knowing meant not controlling, and not controlling meant vulnerability. The emotional tension between them deepened, not through interaction, but through proximity. Because the more she understood him, the more she realized something unsettling. He was not unpredictable. He was precise, which meant everything he was doing with her had already been decided. And that thought was more dangerous than fear, because it meant she was not reacting to his world. She was inside a plan she did not yet understand. And yet, there was something else, something she could not ignore, despite the control, despite the confinement, despite the calculated nature of everything around her. He had not harmed her. He had not forced compliance. He had not treated her as disposable. And that contradiction began to form a new question in her mind. Was he her captor or her only protection? The question did not come with an answer, only tension, because both possibilities existed at the same time. And in a world like this, duality was dangerous because it blurred judgment, and blurred judgment led to mistakes. Amelia refused to make one. She maintained her control, her awareness, her distance, even as the environment around her tightened, even as Lucian's presence became more constant, even as the reality of her situation became clearer. She did not break, because breaking was exactly what the situation demanded, and she would not give it. Lucian observed the shift, not directly, but through pattern, through absence of reaction, through the consistency of her control. And once again, that made her different, because most people placed under this level of containment would fracture, emotionally, psychologically. But Amelia adjusted, and that adjustment made her more dangerous, because control, when maintained under pressure, was not weakness, it was power. Lucian recognized it, but recognition did not change his approach. If anything, it reinforced it, because now he understood the stakes, and the stakes were no longer contained within his control. The confirmation came late, quiet, efficient, but undeniable. One of his outer networks had intercepted movement, not random, not scattered, but focused, directed. Someone or something was closing in, not blindly, but with intent, with knowledge, with precision that matched his own. Lucian stood still as the information settled, not reacting, but calculating, because this was escalation. And escalation required response. Immediate, strategic, final. He turned his attention toward the estate, toward the system he controlled, toward the woman at the center of it all. Amelia felt it before she saw it. The shift, stronger than before, sharper, more defined, because this time, it was not just control. It was preparation for something coming, something unavoidable, something dangerous. And at the center of it was her. Lucian moved with purpose now. No hesitation, no delay, because whatever was approaching was not small. It was not insignificant. It was something that required full attention, full control, full power. And Lucian Devereux was preparing to meet it, not with fear, but with war. Amelia watched him from a distance, and for the first time, she understood the scale of what she was part of. This was not just about her past. This was not just about hidden truths. This was something larger, something that extended beyond her understanding. And now, it was coming closer, closer with every second, closer with every movement, closer to her. Cliffhanger. As the estate locks into a state of control readiness, Lucian realizes one undeniable truth. The enemy hunting Amelia has already crossed into his territory, and this time, he is not preparing for control. He is preparing for war. Power, Amelia Carter realized, was not what defined Lucian Devereux's world. Control did, and control, unlike power, was never visible until you understood how it moved. The shift in her awareness did not happen all at once. It unfolded gradually, through observation rather than explanation. After the state sealed itself into a state of readiness, after Lucian's silent declaration of war, Amelia found herself no longer just contained within his world. She was being exposed to it, not deliberately, but not accidentally either. The difference mattered. At first it was subtle, a change in where she was allowed to stand, a shift in which doors remained open, moments where she was present, not as a participant, but not entirely excluded. Lucian did not invite her into his operations. He simply stopped removing her from them. And that alone changed everything. Amelia's first real glimpse into his empire came during what appeared on the surface to be nothing more than a quiet meeting. There were no raised voices, no visible tension, no declarations of power. The room itself was designed to disarm expectation. Minimalist, refined, almost deceptively calm. Large windows allowed natural light to flood the space, softening the atmosphere in a way that felt intentional. But the people inside were anything but soft. They arrived without announcement, one by one, each carrying a presence that did not need to be explained. Their clothing was precise, their movements controlled, their expressions measured, and yet none of them spoke first, because they were waiting, not for the meeting to begin, but for Lucian. Amelia stood at the far edge of the room, unnoticed by most, but not invisible. She had learned quickly that invisibility, in this world, was an illusion. Everything was seen, everything was recorded, everything mattered. So she remained still, observing. Lucian entered without disruption. No announcement, no acknowledgement. And yet, the entire room shifted. It was not fear that defined the change. It was alignment. Posture straightened. Attention sharpened. Silence deepened. Because when Lucian Devereux entered a space, control followed. He did not take a central seat. He did not assert dominance through position. Instead, he stood, and the others adjusted accordingly. That was the first lesson Amelia understood. Power demanded attention. Control commanded it without asking. The meeting began without formal introduction. No one stated purpose. No one outlined objectives. And yet, every person in the room knew exactly why they were there. The discussion unfolded in fragments. Short exchanges. Measured statements. Information passed with precision. There were no wasted words. No emotional inflection. No unnecessary explanation. And beneath it all, a structure, invisible, but absolute. Amelia watched carefully, because something about it did not match what she had expected. This was not negotiation. It was alignment of systems. Decisions were not debated. They were refined. Outcomes were not argued. They were positioned. And Lucian did not lead the conversation. He directed it, subtly, through silence, through timing, through the smallest adjustments in tone and focus. A single glance from him could redirect the entire discussion. A pause could shift momentum. A word, rare and precise, could finalize what others had spent minutes approaching. He did not control through force. He controlled through understanding. And that was far more dangerous. Amelia felt it settle into her mind with clarity. Control is not about being the strongest in the room. It is about being the one who defines how the room functions. That realization became her anchor, because suddenly, everything made sense. The estate, the silence, the precision, the absence of chaos. Lucian's world was not built to display power. It was built to maintain control. Beyond that first meeting, the exposure expanded, not dramatically, but enough. Amelia began to witness patterns across different interactions, different people, different environments, and yet the same structure. A call placed in one room resulted in movement across continents. A brief exchange led to decisions that reshaped unseen networks. Names were mentioned only once and never repeated because repetition was unnecessary. Everyone already knew his empire was not local. It was not contained. It was not even visible in a traditional sense. It was layered, international, interconnected through systems that operated beneath the surface of public structures, financial institutions, private security networks, political intermediaries, corporate alliances, each one functioning independently, yet aligned under a single principle, Lucian's control. Amelia began to understand that his influence did not rely on presence. He did not need to be in every place, because his system was. That was the second lesson. Power moves. Control remains. Lucian remained at the center of it all, but not in the way she had once assumed. He was not constantly issuing commands. He was not reacting to every development. He was anticipating, adjusting, positioning, Everything he did carried intent. Every decision existed within a larger design. And most importantly, he never acted without understanding the outcome. That was what set him apart. Not his authority, not his resources, but his precision. Amelia watched him across different moments. In meetings, in silence, in observation. And she noticed something that unsettled her more than anything else. He did not feel, not in the way others did. There was no visible frustration, no satisfaction, no hesitation. He operated with emotional detachment, so complete, it felt engineered, as if emotion itself had been removed from the equation and replaced with calculation. That realization should have made him easier to predict, but instead, it made him impossible, because emotion could be anticipated. Calculated behavior could not. Amelia adapted. She had to, because remaining passive in a system like this was the same as disappearing within it. So she began to observe more intentionally, not just what happened, but how it happened, patterns, timing, reactions. She noticed how certain individuals spoke only after specific cues, how decisions followed invisible sequences, how silence often carried more meaning than words. And slowly, she began to understand. Not everything, not completely, but enough. Enough to see the structure beneath the surface. Enough to anticipate small outcomes. Enough to recognize shifts before they fully formed. Her awareness sharpened. And with that, her confidence changed. Not outwardly. She remained composed, controlled, measured, but internally, something had shifted. She was no longer overwhelmed by his world. She was learning how to navigate it. That was the beginning of her transformation. Because survival, she realized, was not about enduring fear. It was about outthinking it. Fear clouded judgment. Fear limited perception. Fear made people predictable. And predictability was weakness. So she let go of it. Not completely, but enough. Enough to think clearly. Enough to act deliberately. Enough to exist within a system, without being consumed by it. Lucian noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed. The change was subtle. A difference in her posture. A shift in her gaze. The way she processed information before reacting. He did not acknowledge it. He did not interrupt it. But he observed, because adaptation was valuable, but it was also dangerous. A variable that learned too quickly became unpredictable, and unpredictability threatened control. Yet, he allowed it. That alone was its own kind of answer. Days passed, or what felt like days. Time in Lucian's world was not measured traditionally. It was measured in outcomes, in shifts, in movement beneath stillness. And through it all, Amelia continued to learn, to observe, to understand, until she noticed something that did not fit. It began as a minor inconsistency, a corridor she had not seen before, not hidden, but not acknowledged either. People moved around it, not through it. Access points that should have existed did not. Security presence that was subtle, but deliberate, more contained, more focused, more restrictive. Amelia paused, not physically, but mentally, because by now, she understood something critical. Nothing in Lucian's world existed without purpose, which meant, if something was concealed, it was meant to be. Her curiosity sharpened, but so did her caution, because curiosity in a system like this could be dangerous. Yet, understanding required risk, and she had already come too far to remain ignorant. So she adjusted. Her movement became more calculated, her presence quieter, her attention sharper. She did not approach directly. She observed patterns first. Timing, access, behavior of those assigned nearby. She waited for the moment where the system shifted just enough to allow her through, and eventually it did, not by mistake, but by gap, a brief window, a moment where control recalibrated. And for the first time, Amelia moved outside the boundaries she had been given. The air felt different, not colder, not heavier, but isolated, as if the space itself existed separately from the rest of the estate. She stepped forward, carefully, aware of every movement, every sound, every possible consequence. Because now, she was not just observing the system, she was testing it. The corridor extended further than expected, minimal, silent, devoid of the subtle elegance that defined the rest of Lucian's world. This place was not designed to be seen. It was designed to exist, unnoticed, unquestioned, and that was what made it dangerous. Amelia reached the end, a single door, unmarked, sealed, and yet active. She could feel it, not physically, but through instinct, through everything she had learned. This was not just another part of the estate. This was something else, something hidden, something controlled even more tightly than everything she had seen before. Her hand hovered, not touching, not yet, because she understood something in that moment with absolute clarity. Some structures are not meant to be discovered, not because they are weak, but because they are too important to be seen. And yet, she had found it. The question was no longer whether she should proceed. It was, what would happen if she did? Her fingers moved, slowly, deliberately, and the moment they made contact, a quiet mechanical sound broke the silence. A click, soft, precise, unmistakable. The door unlocked, and Amelia's breath stilled, because in Lucien Devereux's world, nothing opened without permission, which meant this had not been an accident. As the door begins to open on its own, Amelia realizes a terrifying truth. This hidden part of Lucien's empire was never meant to be found unless she was meant to find it. Some decisions are made in seconds. Others are designed long before the moment arrives. And in Lucien Devereux's world, no decision was ever just a choice. It was a calculation, a risk, a shift in outcome that could determine who remained standing and who didn't. Amelia understood that now, especially after what she had found. The hidden section of the estate was not just an anomaly. It was a fracture in the system, a place where Lucien's control did not follow the same structure, where something existed outside the order she had begun to understand. And that meant one thing. There were parts of his empire that even he did not allow to be seen. But she had seen it, even if only partially, even if only enough to realize it should not exist. She did not speak of it immediately, because instinct told her something important. In this world, information was not power until it was used correctly, and using it too early was the same as losing it. But Lucien already knew. Of course he did. Nothing within his system moved without his awareness. And Amelia had moved. When he entered the room this time, there was no silence filled with ambiguity. There was clarity, direct, unavoidable. He did not position himself at a distance. He did not observe from afar. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough to remove any illusion of separation. And for the first time, there was no question in his gaze, only confirmation. Amelia held her position, still, composed, but aware, because this was not observation. This was confrontation. Lucien studied her for a moment, not searching, not analyzing, but measuring, because whatever he needed to know, he already did. The hidden section, her movement, her awareness, it had all been accounted for, and now it had to be addressed. The silence between them was different this time, not strategic, not exploratory. It was decisive, because what came next would define everything that followed. Amelia's thoughts moved quickly, not in panic, but in precision. She understood what this moment was. Not punishment, not accusation, but something far more complex. A test, and not just of her actions, but of her understanding. Lucien shifted slightly, his presence anchoring the space around them. Control, absolute, unquestioned, but beneath that control, there was something else, something sharper, more focused, because this was not just about what she had discovered. It was about what she would do with it. The realization settled with weight, because for the first time, she was not just reacting to his world. She was influencing it, and influence, in a system like this, was dangerous. Lucien's gaze remained fixed on her, unwavering, calculated, and within it, there was a question, unspoken, but clear. What would she choose? Amelia felt the pressure of it, not external, but internal, because the choice was not simple. It was not between right and wrong. It was between survival and consequence, between truth and control, between loyalty and freedom. She could resist, push against the system, attempt to break from it. But she understood now, this was not a system that broke easily, and resistance without strategy was failure, or she could align, not fully, not permanently, but enough to survive, enough to learn, enough to gain control, in ways that were not immediately visible, because control, she had learned, was not always about dominance. Sometimes it was about positioning. Lucian watched her carefully, not for fear, not for hesitation, but for thought, because this was not a test of obedience. It was a test of intelligence, a test of whether she understood the world she was inside, and more importantly, whether she could function within it. The mission came without explanation, not detailed, not defined, but clear enough to carry weight. It was not something trivial, not something replaceable. It was something that required precision, awareness, and control, something that required her. And that alone changed everything, because Lucian Devereux did not assign critical tasks without reason, which meant he trusted her, or at least, he trusted what she was capable of, and that trust was not given lightly. Amelia recognized it immediately, and with that recognition came realization. Her position had changed, not externally, not visibly, but structurally. She was no longer just protected. She was being utilized, and that meant she mattered, not just as a connection to the past, but as a factor in the future. The weight of that settled slowly, because influence came with consequence, and whatever choice she made now would not just affect her, it would affect him, his empire, his control, everything he had built. The realization was unsettling, because it placed her in a position she had never expected. Power, not absolute, not defined, but present, and power, in this world, was dangerous. Lucian's gaze sharpened slightly, because he saw it, the shift, the understanding, the moment where she realized what was truly at stake. And in that moment, he knew she was not weak, she was not uncertain, she was calculating, just like him. And that was both an advantage and a risk. The silence stretched again, but this time, it was not empty. It was filled with decision. Amelia did not respond immediately, because immediate responses were predictable, and predictable was controllable. Instead, she allowed the moment to exist, to settle, to define itself before she moved within it, because this was not about reacting. It was about choosing, and once the choice was made, there would be no reversal. Lucian waited, not impatiently, but deliberately, because he understood something critical. The time she took was part of the answer, because those who acted too quickly did not understand the weight of decision, and those who hesitated too long were not capable of making it. But Amelia balanced between both, which meant she understood, and that understanding was what he had been testing from the beginning. When she finally moved, it was subtle, controlled, but decisive, not submission, not defiance, but alignment, calculated, intentional. And that was the answer. Lucian saw it immediately, not in her movement, but in her intent. And with that, the test was complete. But the moment did not end, because there was one final piece, one truth that had not yet been revealed. And that truth was the foundation of everything. Lucian stepped closer, not enough to break control, but enough to shift the dynamic completely, because this was no longer about observation, or testing, or calculation. This was about truth, and truth, in his world, was never simple. Amelia held his gaze, unwavering, because now she needed to understand, not just the system, not just the mission, but him, because everything connected back to one question. Why her? Why had he chosen her? Why had he taken her from that moment, from that life, and placed her here? The answer came without words, not spoken, but revealed in fragments, in understanding, in the way everything aligned. Her past, her family, the hidden connections, the betrayal that had nearly destroyed him, and at the center of it all, a link, personal, direct, unavoidable. She was not just connected to his past. She was part of it, in ways she had never been told, in ways that had been hidden from her entire life. And Lucian had known, not fully at first, but enough to recognize her significance, enough to make the decision, enough to bring her into his world, not as a random choice, but as a calculated one, because she was not just a variable. She was a key to something unfinished, something unresolved, something that still had the power to destroy everything. Amelia felt the weight of it settle, not as fear, but as clarity, because now everything made sense, and that clarity changed everything between them, between the past, between what was coming next, because now the choice she had made was not just about survival, it was about consequence. For both of them, cliffhanger. As the truth settled between them, Amelia realizes the terrifying reality. Lucian didn't choose her by chance. He chose her because her existence is tied to the one betrayal that nearly destroyed him. Some stories do not end with victory. They end with change. And in the world Lucian Devereux built, change was the one thing he could never afford to lose control over. But control was already slipping, not through chaos, not through betrayal, but through something far more dangerous, understanding. Amelia Carter was no longer the woman who had been taken from her life and placed into his. She was no longer the variable he had evaluated, or the asset he had positioned. She had evolved, and that evolution was the one outcome Lucian had not fully accounted for, because Amelia did not break. She adapted, and then she changed the system she was inside. It began subtly, in the way she observed instead of reacted, in the way she analyzed instead of feared, in the way she moved through his world, not as someone confined by it, but as someone learning how it functioned. Lucian saw it long before anyone else did, because he had been watching her from the beginning, not as a captor watches a prisoner, but as a strategist watches a variable that refuses to behave predictably. And unpredictability was the beginning of change. The truth behind his decision was not simple. It never was. Amelia was not chosen at random. She was not a mistake. She was not collateral. She was connected to something buried deep within Lucian's past, a betrayal that had nearly dismantled everything he had built, a fracture in his empire that had come from within. Someone close, someone trusted, someone who had nearly succeeded. That betrayal had left a mark, not visible, but permanent. And Lucian did not forget. He never forgot. Every structure he built afterward was designed to prevent that kind of failure from ever happening again. But time changes things, and sometimes it reveals what was once hidden. Amelia's connection was not obvious at first, not direct, but layered, hidden within lines of family history, within decisions made long before she had any awareness of the world she was born into. Her family was not innocent. They were part of a network that intersected with the very betrayal that had shaped Lucian's rise, which meant her existence was not separate from his past. It was embedded within it, and that changed everything, because if she was connected to the past, then she was also connected to what remained unresolved. Lucian did not bring her into his world without reason. He brought her in because the past was not finished, and she was the key to finishing it. But something unexpected happened along the way. She did not remain where he placed her. She grew, not in the way he predicted, but in a way that challenged the very structure of his control. She became observant, then aware, then influential. And influence was far more dangerous than obedience, because influence could shift outcomes, and outcomes determine the future. The moment Amelia began to understand the system she was inside, she stopped being just a part of it. She became someone who could interact with it, shape it, redirect it. Lucian noticed this shift during moments others would have overlooked. A slight hesitation in a decision, a subtle change in direction, an outcome that did not align with expectation, but still resulted in control. It was Amelia, not acting openly, but adjusting the balance in ways that were not immediately visible. And that was the beginning of her transformation, from victim to observer, to something else entirely. Something Lucian had not anticipated, an influence. Amelia had always been under pressure, from the moment she was taken, from the moment she realized the world she was now a part was not built on fairness, but on control. But instead of collapsing under that pressure, she refined it, turned inward, and used it to sharpen her perception. Fear did not disappear, but evolved. It became awareness, and awareness became strength. The more she understood Lucian's world, the less it controlled her. Not completely, not fully, but enough. Enough to allow her to make decisions that mattered. Enough to allow her to influence outcomes. Enough to make her presence in his world irreplaceable. Lucian realized this during the final conflict. Not a single event, but a culmination, a convergence of everything that had been building since the moment she entered his world. A threat, a response, a moment where the system itself was tested. And in that moment, Amelia did not hesitate. She did not freeze. She did not break. She acted, not recklessly, not emotionally, but with precision, with awareness, with understanding. And the outcome shifted, not dramatically, not visibly to everyone, but enough to change the trajectory of what would have been, enough to preserve what mattered. And in doing so, she became something Lucian had never fully intended, not just part of the system, but part of its stability. And that was the moment everything changed, because Lucian Devereux had built his entire empire on control, on precision, on the ability to dictate outcomes before they unfolded. But Amelia introduced something else, uncertainty, not chaos, but something more subtle, something more dangerous, a variable that could not be fully predicted. And because of that, he began to feel something unfamiliar, not weakness, but something close to it, something he had spent his entire life avoiding. Dependence, not emotional, not overt, but structural, because her presence had begun to matter, not just to the outcome of a single event, but to the balance of everything he controlled. And that was the point of no return. Amelia noticed a shift, not through words, but through behavior, through decisions, through the way he adjusted when she was involved. He did not control her, not in the way he controlled everything else, because she did not respond to control in the same way. And that changed the dynamic between them. Power was no longer one-sided. It had begun to shift, subtly, quietly, but undeniably. And for the first time, Amelia understood something critical. She was not just surviving inside his world. She was reshaping it. Months passed. Time moved differently in Lucian's world, measured not by days, but by shifts in control, by changes in structure, by outcomes that defined the future. And through it all, Amelia remained, not as she was, but as something new, something refined, something aware. Her fear did not disappear completely, but it no longer dictated her actions. Her strength was not loud, but it was undeniable. And her understanding of the world she had been forced into made her dangerous in a way no one had anticipated, including Lucian, because she had learned something he had not expected. Control was not permanent. It was maintained. And anything that could be maintained could be lost